right now, too many companies are treating each data center project like a snowflake, right? So everyone is completely different. The specs are completely different. They're sending out, the bid requests to, could be 30 different companies that are coming back in from 5 different GCs, and everybody has their own recommendations, and so they're just adding in far too much complexity and just too much change and too much opportunity for issues to take place. Hi, this is Ben Myers from DH Pace, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Welcome, data center friends. It is Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to have a very special guest joining me here today. I'm welcoming Ben Myers, who is a national account sales executive with DH Pace based out of Pennsylvania. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you agreeing to come on and share your wisdom that you've picked up over the course of your sales career and how you're now deploying all of that wisdom, all that knowledge and experience in the digital infrastructure industry. So with that in mind, I'm super curious how you ended up in this place now where you've had so much experience in physical security and specifically are zeroing in on data centers. Was it something that you had carefully planned on over the course of your career? Did you see that all of a sudden, because of NVIDIA, that there's massive investments being made in the data center space? How did all this happen for you?
Yeah, no, great question. So a little bit of dumb luck, a little bit of planning. So I was in the physical security space for over 20 years. I was on the manufacturing side for security, and then recently was able to join the DH Pace family. So DH Pace is headquartered out of Kansas City, but they are a national company. They have 70 locations around the country. They have 1,700 or so technicians. They're closing in on 4,000 employees, and they've been in the data center world for close to 20 years now, as well as their other verticals. So whether it's retail, logistics, distribution, but I was brought on board. I have a background not only with security but with technology as well, and I'm joining the national accounts team to work on the data center space and really be laser focused on creating an easy button for the owner operators of the world, for the GCs, and for the architects. And it's been an exciting ride so far, and we've had a lot of success, and I'm excited to talk about it today with you.
That's awesome. So it's the owner operators. Probably, I imagine those are some of the smaller colocation companies where you're dealing directly with an owner, or does it really just depend on the maturity of the stage, whether you're dealing with an owner or whether you're dealing with the GC or the architect?
No, so we deal with all of the largest owner operators in the country. So anybody from a Microsoft to a Google to some of the smaller colo guys, and we're a full life cycle company. So we're working with the architects and the GCs as it relates to the specs, talking about like the codes, making sure that all the safety protocols are in place. And then we also do supply, right? So we'll supply whether it's through the owner operator or through the GC, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, as we go. But we're really changing the game in terms of making it easy for everybody throughout the entire process. And then we're full life cycle because, like I mentioned, we have 70 locations around the country. Managing like the maintenance, right? So preventative maintenance, the service, like planning that out, having any kind of break fix, repair, remodel, we're able to help with that as well. So having that all planned out from the beginning helps these owner operators really control their total cost of ownership. And then ultimately it increases their uptime because they're not worried about things breaking. And while we might be, less than 1% of the total spend of a data center, physical security, not just door hardware, but anything from bollards to perimeter fencing to access control, you name it. If something like that goes down, you have some serious outages and some serious problems to take care of. So having that all kind of mapped out from the beginning and working with one partner to be the glue has really been a real blessing for some of these owner operators.
Yeah, I imagine that when it comes to the concept of the easy button and taking friction out of the process and making it seamless, that's a big win, because especially now where there's such a rapid pace of construction going on now because of
Yes.
so many older obsolete facilities that either need to be repurposed or just building from scratch to take care of AI workloads and high performance computing, that as much as the physical security may not be getting anywhere near the kind of headlines as cybersecurity and all the issues that are going on with density and grid power and everything like that, like physical security goes down. It's
Sure.
it's a major problem, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not even just like the security of like a bad actor coming in. If you have doors that are breaking on site for whatever reason, temperature control is another major issue in the data center world. And that goes, from the docks all the way into the inner aisles, right? So you have a lot to take into consideration, and making sure all of that's working properly. I want to say I read somewhere that it was like anywhere from a couple $100,000 to $1 million for every minute of downtime for a data center. And so making sure that your facility is operating the way it's supposed to is critically important for these folks.
What's interesting too is I talk to a lot of people on the facility side who tend to spend a ton of time on heating and power and cooling and sensors. You don't hear that much visibility about your category, which is why I guess it's awesome that it's this green space for you to get out in front and take the lead as the subject matter experts and the trusted advisors in the space, and really leaning forward with an educate first approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been fantastic. We're a company that I like to say you don't really hear too much about until there's an issue, and then you're scrambling to figure out who you can call. And so for us to be proactive, working with these folks, scheduling the preventative maintenance, getting the schedules built, it really does make a big difference to these folks.
Yeah. So with that in mind, you've clearly are ahead of the curve in figuring out that the whole sales profession is changing to be a lot more about being the consultant and the teacher and the trusted advisor, and way less just on the transaction, just by the whole methodology that you're explaining that you're using to figure out what needs to be done, and supplying the product is secondary to all of that. With all of that in mind, if someone approached you that was thinking of getting into a sales career and they were really early on in this process, maybe they're still in high school or they're just starting out college, maybe it's a neighbor's son or daughter or friend or family member or relative or something, and they're in a situation of they're trying to figure out if this is a good viable path for them, what kind of advice would you give to someone in that situation that's exploring something related to B2B or mid-market or enterprise kind of sales, specifically leaning towards technology?
Sure. Yeah. So I think everywhere you read, every conference you go to, labor comes up, right? It's an issue that is coming up at every level of every organization, from just the actual laborers in the workforce to C-suite, trying to figure out how we can get more folks involved, right? So whether that's dealing with kids at trade schools, whether it's the trade colleges, or whether it's folks that are going for a 4-year degree that want to get into business in some sense, I would absolutely recommend this field, just and technology in general. I think it's future proofed, right? It's the demand is far outpacing the supply at this point. And it's a fun industry, right? It's all cutting edge stuff. It's a great environment. You meet a lot of great people, and I would just tell you that take a chance, get out there, meet a lot of people, network as much as you can, and if you can take an internship somewhere at one of these technology companies, or anyone that's involved in the supply chain for the data center world, do it. Take a chance, and you won't be disappointed.
It's some really interesting feedback, because there are some grassroots initiatives that have popped up the last couple of years in and around the data center industry, recognizing Like if you think back to the mid to late 2010s, you go to a conference and you look around, you're like, wow, like the average age of this group, clearly there's a big percentage of the group that's getting closer to retirement. What's going to be next? So they've done a reasonably good job of getting out to the high schools and the colleges. However, I think a big part of that, however, is they're still focusing a lot on the IT careers and the facilities careers and the construction careers. I think there's a whole redefining what the client-facing playbooks looks like across the whole GTM team, whether it's sales leading the charge, marketing leading the charge, whether it's account managers dealing with post-purchase and project management type of considerations, whether it's product managers. So yeah, that's an interesting challenge just in and of itself, is how you find the space to make that a priority to proactively recruit, and how you convince leadership to invest in internship type of programs for this kind of talent. Because for sure, it's very, if you think there's few colleges where you can major in data centers, there's also very few colleges where you can take many sales related courses. Marketing maybe a little, but sales is tougher. So like, how do you get the hands-on experience?
Right. And I don't think a lot of folks are going to school of any kind, you know, specifically focused on the data center world. A lot of it's more of just general business. And all of that applies, right? Whether it's marketing, finance, you know, sales, whatever it might be, there's a role for you in this space. And I tell people, listen, it's a career, it's not a job, because you're going to be able to grow your skill set, learn a ton throughout the whole process, and really you're kind of making your own path, right? You figure out where you want to go, and sky's the limit.
So it's interesting too, when you think about that level of specialization, as I sometimes come across companies in this space where data centers are one of 3, 4, 5 different lines of business. And some of them try to have a single sales team and a single marketing team that covers 3, 4, 5 different verticals and lines of business. Some of them break that up and have specializations, but that for sure introduces some interesting challenges as well when you're trying to advance a narrative of your team really being experts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to have folks that are specialized in this space. So, you know, as example, like we have folks internally for us that all they do is deal with data centers all day, every day. They know what the codes are. They know what products go in these things. They're able to be consultants, as you said, to the owner operators, to the architects, to the GCs. And, you know, you come into a company like ours and you're interested in the data center space, those kind of people take you under their wing. They're going to teach you, you know, teach you the right way to do things, and ultimately, again, build your career.
So when you look at what's going on in digital infrastructure companies, data centers, regardless of whether they're mid-size, national, global, colocation, hyperscale, across the different kinds of data centers, what do you see as the biggest shortcomings, the biggest problems, the biggest errors, omissions that companies make when it comes to the doors, the windows, just physical security in general? What do you wish that if you had 5 or 10 minutes to save them millions of dollars of mistakes, where would you start?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's very broad. Yeah, I would tell you, if I could summarize it right now, too many companies are treating each data center project like a snowflake, right? So everyone is completely different. The specs are completely different. They're sending out, you know, the bid requests to, you know, could be 30 different companies that are coming back in from 5 different GCs, and you know, everybody has their own recommendations, and so they're just adding in far too much complexity and just too much change and too much opportunity for issues to take place. So I would tell you, work with companies like ours. If for some reason, you know, ours isn't a fit for you, start to think about how can you consolidate, how can you, you know, add consistency throughout the entire process. So each spec design looks very similar. You're using 80% of the same products on each data center. For these colo companies that have multiple tenants, or you're building these and you're selling them off, you know, what are the products and what are the builds look like that are going to fit the most customers so that you can have your supply chain built out to properly support your business. And companies like ours, we have no problem bringing in the inventory so that when things go wrong down the road, you're able to get the right fix within 24 hours versus you're going into scramble mode. You don't know who to call because what broke on project X is different than project Y, and it just creates a lot of headaches. So I would say if there's one piece of advice, it's how can you simplify and be consistent?
Yeah, for sure. Because like you mentioned before,
the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
where there's costs that are very apparent, there's costs that are hidden, and then there's this whole domino effect of what can happen when you are overly complex and not standardized. And I see that as a big message going across this ecosystem right now in a lot of different ways. Like, for example, when I talk with people that are in Europe, for example, there's all of these sustainability directives that are coming down for how regulations are being handled. So if you're a multinational operator that has significant amounts of facilities in Europe and you're trying to standardize your dashboards and your key performance indicators, and how, especially as a publicly traded company, are you really going to have a different playbook for a dozen facilities all over Europe and a dozen facilities in the US? So that's definitely forcing some issues. Are there similar kinds of considerations that come up nationally,
100%.
multinationally with,
Yeah. So it's funny. I was starting to smile as you were talking there. I literally was on a call today talking through energy loss with like dock doors, right? But it also applies to other doors within the facilities. So you talk about energy savings. If they don't have the right seals on the doors and you're losing your temperature, how much additional spend and ultimately energy are you utilizing to keep the facility at the right temperature that you need it, right? And then when you think about these companies that are trying to build but they don't exactly know who the tenant's going to be, or they are just they're trying to follow a generic plan, they'll build these out, and then once the final tenant decides to move in, they'll rip out millions of dollars worth of equipment and building materials to retrofit a new building just to meet the needs of this new tenant. So you think about all the waste that's going into that's not helping anybody meet their sustainability goals.
Yeah, and you're right. If you don't bring those issues up, there is a strong possibility that one or more of the stakeholders on the decision committee may have completely overlooked this issue. That's the very definition of that whole idea of the challenge or sale methodology that was popular 10 years ago. You're not just answering their questions, you're sharing the insight about things that are 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of where they are now that they ought to be thinking about, but it hasn't crossed their mind quite yet. But because you've worked with companies, dozens of companies just like them in this industry, in this geographic location at this size, where all the potholes, where the forks in the road are.
Exactly. Yeah, and like you said, it's all about listening, understanding what their current issues are, and then guiding them for issues that maybe they don't have visibility to at this point.
So you identify, there's 3 different kinds of stakeholders, 3 different kinds of buyer personas that you're working with on a regular basis: the owner operators, the general contractors, and the architects. Do you tend to get involved with all 3 of those categories, regardless of whether it's new construction or retrofit, or are there one or more of those segments that are more conducive to looking at these kinds of physical security investments, depending on whether it's new construction or retro?
Yeah. So when you're talking new construction, definitely all 3, right? When you get into the retrofit and some of the break fix stuff, you're not really dealing so much with the architects unless they're doing like a full remodel. But yeah, when you're talking new construction, which is like the big spend, right? You want to be ticked and tied with all three of those. Make sure that everybody is operating together. And really, you can throw in the manufacturers there as well, because they all bring different specialties to the conversation too, right? So making sure that everybody understands the game plan, understands the end goal, and is working together to make it a seamless process. So yes, I am in conversation with all three areas, and really, 3.5 if you're adding manufacturers in.
That actually raises an interesting question as well. When you look at what other categories do you find are adjacent to what you tend to do, that where professional networking can be hugely helpful, both for not just sharing referrals, but potentially having good working relationships for when things that you're doing domino into someone else and vice versa?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm huge on is networking, right? So I'm constantly on LinkedIn. I'm either posting on there or I'm reading articles. I get a ton of, lead information, and really just bolstering my, my personal, knowledge base. But I'm always trying to reach out to people that are in non-competing areas. And again, we're not a manufacturer, so, we're agnostic to the different brands. But I'm, reaching out to folks that are non-competing, either in the space or as manufacturers. And I'm setting up virtual calls with them all the time, or we'll go out for a coffee. Maybe we're meeting up at a live event, and we're talking through ways that we can provide additional solutions to the folks in the industry. So be it GCs, be it, the end users of owner operators. And it doesn't always mean that we're going to be able to add additional value together, but we might be able to lead share, provide information that might help them solve a need in their space, or maybe it leads to additional business for one or multiple of the companies when we're all meeting together.
So cool. That's really helpful to know. What about internally? Who are the other kind of team members that you interface with to get a new client over the finish line? And then what kinds of roles within DHPace are typically involved post-purchase?
Yeah. So we have a massive team involved in terms of customer support. So taking care of the customer is, the top priority for us. So from the estimating teams, the bidding teams, to the project experts, where they're making sure everything's going smoothly. You've got folks in the national accounts team that are reaching out and making sure everybody's in the loop, to the shipping teams, the warehousing teams. It depends on what product categories we're talking about, where it can really expand out to post-construction. Then you're getting into the facilities teams, making sure that they're coordinating for preventative maintenance. Then you've got all the folks that support on the emergency services. So something breaks and they have to get a technician out there right away. These folks are working 24/7, 365. Someone's always on call, making sure that we can get folks out there and really be a true partner for these folks throughout the full life cycle of the data center.
And is that usually on the client side, on the operator side, who would usually their main point of contact? Is it a facilities director? Is it a physical security director, or does it just depend on how large the facility or how large the operator is with how specialized the job roles are?
Yeah, it really varies. New construction, you're dealing with a lot of like project managers. And again, it depends on how big it is. Some of them have their own architect teams, their own design teams. And then post-construction, you're dealing with some kind of facilities maintenance folks that are involved. Could be on-site, could be off-site.
Depending on whether it's one person covering multiple facilities and spending a ton of time in the car versus but whether they're big enough to have dedicated. And I guess it depends on the time of day also, because maybe they have someone there during regular 40,
Oh my
50 hour
goodness.
a week and nights and weekends.
Right.
They one person covering 5 facilities or something like that.
It's humorous when you think about how large these facilities are versus how many people are actually working in them at any given time. Like it could be a massive facility with like 15 people total, like in the whole building. And so getting into some of these facilities for the techs can be, it can take a long time. It can take 90 minutes until all the clearances are done and they're good to go. So
I hear you. Yeah, that's one of the interesting challenges that developers have with getting a lot of these new projects green lighted is because it can help with taxable revenues, but it doesn't tend to create the same kind of jobs as like another building facility that's occupying that much space would. So yeah, there's all kinds of interesting challenges around the growth of this, which presents challenges around selling to a whole new kind of stakeholder than the industry's had to sell to historically. But your stakeholder is a lot more straightforward.
Yes, absolutely.
The GCs, the architects, the operators for sure are all on the same side as you. It's just a matter of how much they prioritize all different aspects of physical security and whether they understand the insights that your team brings to the table.
Yeah. And that's always like folks ask about like, hey, what are some of the challenges in this space? And it's always like, hey, just getting in front of the right people, because once you explain the easy button to all these stakeholders, it's like, it's eye-opening. They're like, why aren't we doing that already? Right. But getting in front of those people can be a real challenge for sure.
Yeah, people always come to me and they act as if there's some magic decision maker, and even if they get the perfect introduction to get to the perfect person, everyone has gotten so risk averse that it's extremely unlikely that the person who's the quote unquote decision maker will actually make a decision without kicking it back to their team, 4, 5, 6 people that report to them, to vet the options before they move forward. So yeah, that's probably one of the bigger challenges.
It is. Yeah.
I always tell people too, is the tools, the downloadable reports, the podcasts, the webinars, sometimes a lot of that can help because it's perceived as low risk than recommending a specific company. But yeah, the hardest part is getting attention of the right person in the right context. So you get out of the vendor box as quickly as possible so they see you as a real expert and an advisor. And part of that's the hiring and recruiting. Part of it is employers being willing to invest significant resources in professional development and upskilling and retraining and really all of the above.
Right. And like you mentioned, previously, like getting the message out that you're not selling a product, you're selling a solution, right?
Yeah, that's super, super important. With that in mind, Ben, how do you see your job, your team's role in the data center ecosystem changing in the next 2, 3, 4 years when you look out into your crystal ball? What do you think stays the same? What do you think is different?
Yeah. So I would tell you that the biggest change that I'm seeing is a lot of folks, and this isn't just in what we do. I hear this from, again, non-competing folks in the industry that I talk to all the time, moving to more of the owner furnished contractor installed OFCI, and just these owner operators really wanting to have a bigger stake in the supply chain. They're still fresh off of COVID and all the crazy lead time issues, and so people want to control it more, not only from a cost perspective, but just from an uptime perspective. And so I think over the next few years, you're going to see more and more of the owner operators taking an active role in that and helping to make more of the decisions on inventorying and product alignment so that it makes their life easier. Versus today, a lot of that goes through the GC, and they're allowing the GC to make the decision. Sometimes, depending on the GC, they're great. They know what they're doing. They're not hyper focused on cost. They're hyper focused on value. Others are not. Others are only focused on squeezing every penny out of the equation that they can. And that's created heartburn. You have some products that are 32-week lead times. And if people aren't taking that into account, you can have some real, major issues. And And so as the owners get more and more involved, I think there's going to be a change in the total supply chain.
So from where you're sitting, you envision that the GCs are going to face massive pressure around commoditization and reinventing themselves in the next few years to
The ones that don't get it.
Value. Yeah.
Yeah. The ones that don't get it, the ones that are only focused on the dollar and you just become another line, on the transaction sheet. They're going to be the ones that really feel the pressure. The ones today, some of these GCs that we work with are phenomenal. They get it. It's all about the value add to the end user, being the owner operator. I don't think they're going to have any issues, but I think that's going to be the biggest change in the next couple of years from where we sit.
So the transformation of the companies that help to build digital transformation. And it's not surprising, because when I think of the 4 or 5 different categories of the ecosystem, and we divide it up into operators, technology companies, facilities companies, construction, and real estate, and then some things related to outsourced marketing and sales. The construction and the real estate seems to be what's clinging to the traditional sales and marketing playbook way more than the operators and the technology and the facilities companies. It's not to say that there aren't like good podcasts and good webinar programs. There is certainly some of that, but it always seems like the technology companies and the operators are way ahead in that space.
Way ahead. Yeah. And listen, like I said, when we first started the conversation today, I've been in the building industry world for over 2 decades, and I think that's always historically been the case. It's a slow to change industry, the construction industry, and I think you'll continue to see that in the data center space specifically.
Because there definitely is more of a movement to infuse construction with technology. And there's some college programs actually just even an hour south of we are, like, for example, at Florida International, where there's a big construction. It's a lot of interest in getting talent into large scale construction way beyond the traditional kind of residential strip mall kind of projects. So there is for sure a movement around there. But yeah, how it impacts industrial real estate, I don't know. You're right. This certainly is an area where they can either proactively reinvent themselves, or the industry will maneuver around them and find solutions for this, because these projects are so huge.
They're massive,
right?
Yeah.
There's so much capital flowing,
and
and like the idea
demand,
of the difference between it being a couple of weeks versus a couple of months on a delay is like it's an 8-figure opportunity, right. 8-figure cost.
Yeah, and the demand is so far outpacing the supply that it has to change so that these folks can hit their deadlines and stay on their budgets. So I don't think there's any question whether or not it's going to change, pretty quickly.
And it's very consistent with one area that the data center industry has already seen with technology. I interviewed someone a couple of weeks back who owns a big operator in Phoenix, and we were talking about the chip factories that are being built for Taiwan Semiconductor, primarily to feed NVIDIA and Intel right in their backyard on a massive scale because of the federal initiatives and subsidies to jumpstart that. So if you think about, and that was in reaction to post-pandemic of bringing semiconductor manufacturing for strategic reasons back into the US. So from what you're saying, it sounds like some of the high-end manufacturing around your category is also going to be an area where people are going to be rethinking the origin and lead time and how much control they have in the local areas.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Super interesting. So you got to be a supply chain expert with all of this as well.
You have to be, right? That's the value you bring.
Well, Ben, this has been super fascinating. I think it's an really interesting and super important category within the facility side of digital infrastructure that people don't talk about quite enough. So I really appreciate you shining a spotlight on this and walking us through not only how your company approaches the industry, what you're doing as someone that's moved over from physical security into specifically working with digital infrastructure and data centers more recently, the different kind of stakeholders that you interface with on a regular basis. I think it's going to be super helpful for a lot of people in your space that really may not have a lot of knowledge on this particular category. With that in mind, Ben, if someone wants to follow what you're working on or connect with you, is LinkedIn a good place to reach out to you?
Yes, LinkedIn would be great. You can find me on there. I'm easy to find on there. I'm constantly posting something, or you can reach out to me via email, which is benjamin.myers@dhpace.com.
Great. And we'll include the link to your LinkedIn profile in the blog in the show notes as well. If someone wants to learn more about DH Pace and what DH Pace does in the data center industry, is there a specific social media channel that you'd send them to? Is there a part of the website that's especially helpful?
Yeah, you can go right on my LinkedIn. I have hyperlinks to connect you right to the national accounts pages for data centers, or you can just go to dhpace.com and click on the various markets that we're a part of and see what we can do on there. You'll see a whole bunch of different product categories and services we provide.
Cool. This has been super informal. Really appreciate it, Ben. I've been speaking with Benjamin Myers, who is a national account sales executive with DH Pace. Ben is based out of Pennsylvania. Company's headquartered out of Kansas City. Thanks so much, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon, Joshua.
Likewise. Take care now, Ben.
Take care.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.